Assalamu alaikum. I'm your host, Hena Zuberi, and welcome to another episode of Justice for All Now on Muslim Network TV, America's only Muslim focused TV channel. You can watch us on satellite Galaxy 19, Roku, Apple TV, and Amazon Fire TV. Today, we'll be discussing gentrification and the struggle for King Khalid Mosque. We'll be talking with our guest, Nigel Edwards. Nigel Edwards joined the board of Masjid King Khalid 10 years ago. As a local attorney, he was initially enlisted to assist the masjid with its various legal issues. During his tenure with the masjid, he has assisted with both its internal operations as a nonprofit entity and external interactions with the administration of Shah University. Nigel received his undergraduate degree from the Ohio State University in 2008 and his law degree from the University of North Carolina in 2010. Since 2011, he has been practicing law at the law offices of Omar Baloch, PLLC. Thank you so much for joining us, Brother Nigel.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
So, a lot of our audience don't know about King Khalid Mosque or Shah University or even the controversy that has been taking place. So before we get into the current situation, can you tell us a bit of history about King Khalid Mosque and its importance in that region?
So decades ago in the 1970s and then going into the 1980s, you had a very large Muslim student body at Shah University. Shah University itself is one of the oldest historically Black colleges and universities in the country. And it's been in existence since the late 1890s. And so one of the reasons why you had such a large group of people who were coming in to Shah University to study from the Muslim world is because you had a professor who was active in recruiting those students. And his name was Professor Urabi Mustafa. Palestinian descent, he was head of the Islamic Studies department that used to exist at Shah University. And as you saw more and more people coming to study at Shah University from the Muslim world, you saw a Jama'ah, a group of people who wanted to pray, not just students coming to Shah University from outside the country, but also local Muslims who were native to Raleigh, North Carolina. And so, like any small Muslim community, you have a bunch of people together, and there necessitates the existence of an actual facility where we pray, a masjid or a mosque. Mm-hmm. So the professor at that time, Professor Urabi Mustafa, he had an idea. He said, what if I get the funds to develop a masjid for this community? Mm-hmm. And to make it enticing to the university, the idea was to get a grant that the university would receive. And with that grant, they would construct a building on its property that would function as a masjid for the community at large, and also classrooms for the students, and also facilities for the administrators and professors. And that is how the International and Islamic Studies Center came into existence in 1983, about 40 years ago. And that's how it operated. You had classes that were given, international studies, Islamic studies. You had people visiting the masjid to pray the 5 daily prayers, a number of different community service programs that were put on by this facility. And you also, of course, had educational programs that the entire Muslim community locally benefited from. Many of the local Muslims who grew up in this area, this was the first Sunday school that they went to. And this was the first masjid that they went to even. And so that's how it got created. And its existence continued as long as we had an Islamic Studies department, be it under Professor Urabi Mustafa or later on Dr. Ihsan Bagbi. We were protected. But then things didn't start to go as well as we wanted to go. So there was an attempt to close the masjid later on. And fortunately, we were able to fend that attempt off. But in the process of doing so, we lost the Islamic Studies department.
Now, and you spoke a little bit about that. If you could go into a little bit more about how significant is the King Khalid Mosque to the Muslim community in Raleigh, especially for Black Muslims, and what impact did as we will learn more about in the current situation, you could talk a little bit about the current situation, what is happening right now, um, and what the struggle has been in the past.
The significance is highly sentimental to so many people who grew up here because it was one of the first masajid that was established here. And so, for a lot of people, despite the fact that they're moving farther away from downtown Raleigh, perhaps moving out to the suburbs, this was still the message that they grew up in. So, it holds a special place in the heart for that reason. And then also, like a lot of places throughout the country that sees redevelopment, sees growth, and you have things that are changing. Well, the fact that you have a masjid there that still holds true to its values of serving the community, this is one thing that people don't want to see changed. And
Mhm.
like a lot of inner city areas, it is predominantly African American. And what we've seen, of course, is that change for a number of different reasons. But nevertheless, we do want to serve the people who have given so much to the community by remaining a fixture of this community itself.
And what is the current situation? What is uh, what from what we have read, there have been protests, there have been city council hearings, um, and there's just been the seems like a an effort to just shut down this masjid.
So, a big part of the reason why we are so fearful is because history has repeated itself.
Mhm.
So, the first time the university wanted to close the masjid down was in the early 2000s. And there was a very big pushback from the Muslim community, the non Muslim community. And as a result, the plans of the university to close the masjid down permanently were scrapped. However, then when you fast forward 20 years, there was another attempt to close the masjid as well. This time things were a little bit different. So at that time, there was an Islamic studies professor, Ihsan Bagni. He later departed afterwards, and for that reason, we felt the need to incorporate as a nonprofit religious institution. It was called Jama al Taqwa in 2005 when we incorporated, but then 8 years later, we changed our name to the Mosque of the late King Khalid bin Abdulaziz Al Saud Incorporated, or Masjid King Khalid for short. And so we are dealing with university now as a independent nonprofit organization. However, whereas the last time they tried to close the masjid, an official reason was given to the Chicago Tribune that they wanted more offices for the administration for the university. Um, this time around, the reason that we were given initially was because of COVID, which is temporary, of course. And that was the reason that we were given for having to suspend in person religious services in March 2020 when it made sense. But oddly enough, that was the same reason that we were given in February of 2023 when things were much better, of course. And then when the official announcement was made that the university will no longer host a public mosque in March of this year, 2023, there was no reason that was given. So we are still waiting for the official reason why the university made the official announcement to close the masjid for good. We have asked, the media has asked, and no answers have been given. So that is one key difference that we have yet to have at least a reason of some kind as to why the university wanted to close this down.
Mm. And during this process, the chapel at Shah was reopened while the King Khalid Masjid remained closed. And the answer was that this is due to the pandemic. What message did this send to the Muslim community and the broader public about the university's priorities?
So, absent a reason from the university, a concrete reason as to why we were closed that actually made sense, of course, we're going to speculate and wonder as to why. And the very first thing that really made us upset was the fact that the chapel was open to the public. Initially in 2020, it was closed to the public, as most religious organizations were during that time. However, we then saw YouTube videos of in person public religious services that were going on in 2022. And even a member of our own congregation went to a Saturday service, sat in the congregation, no questions asked. And as it should be, anyone should be able to come into a house of worship and enjoy the services that are being provided. But we just were wondering more and more why we did not have that same right. The reason that we were given, at least at that time, as to why that was appropriate was simply because these services were being conducted by university administrators, university professors, and for that reason, being that this was an operation in house, so to speak, they were able to provide these services to the public. What that has to do with COVID, I have no idea. I'm still waiting for a response regarding that. But in short, that was the reason that we were given for why the chapel could operate and why the masjid couldn't, because we were a nonprofit outside entity, apparently.
We're going to take a short break and we'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back. We're here with Nigel Edwards, and we're talking about Shaw University, gentrification, and the closing of King Khalid Mosque. Now, there's the proposed rezoning and development plans, which involve closing the masjid and displacing Black families. How do you see this situation fitting into the broader issue of the housing crisis and gentrification in Raleigh and the rest of the country, especially in historically Black neighborhoods?
We got wind of Shaw University's plans in 2022, just last year. And we were concerned because there's talk of redevelopment, buildings coming down, new buildings coming up. Meanwhile, we're locked out supposedly because of COVID. And so we really wondered, if we don't have a present, what's our future going to be? We went to a community meeting that was held by one of the university's administrators named Kevin Sullivan, and he pitched his redevelopment plan, or the idea that the university had, to the community. And their plan is to leverage their real estate and to get much needed funds that this university needs. And we can all agree that Shaw University needs help when it comes to the funding that they require to let their university thrive. And the idea is that they take their existing buildings, they knock them down, and they make the most of the valuable real estate that they're on in downtown Raleigh to build high rises. And some of these units will be for the university's use, some will be for commercial use, some will be for residential use. But there's an opportunity for people to make money and for the university to get much needed resources and facilities. That all sounds good, except for the fact that we had no place in this plan, and we wanted to make that known to the university. Also, many people in the community said the exact same thing. And so what you have is a community, institution of a community being erased during redevelopment of an existing piece of land. That's the definition textbook of gentrification.
Mhm.
And so that was our main focus and concern when conveying these ideas and what was going on to us to the local government, the Raleigh City Council. Fortunately, because this is such a big issue, not just to the local community in Raleigh, it's an issue nationally. We had a lot of support and a lot of people coming together in a very diverse coalition to oppose the plans that could be good, except for the fact that so many were excluded from the actual planning process.
Hmm. Can for those in the audience who don't understand gentrification, who may see all these new buildings, cleanup of downtowns across the country, and wonder why that's such a problem?
So I think we can all agree that change is good, in a lot of respects. We can't just be static. We have to advance, we have to improve. That's a part of our nature as human beings. But the question is, can we do that to the disadvantage of other people? And that is the issue that we see, in fact. So if you want to have things that are new, if we want to have better services, make sure that these are things that are actually serving the people who live there, the people who have given so much to the community as it already is. And it's just simply unjust to push them out for the benefit of other people who haven't put the work in to make the community what it was in the first place.
And that's really important. I mean, we see this in DC. We see um, families who've been living there for generations not being able to afford taxes of their own homes because property taxes have gone up, and that we see companies, real estate companies that are owned by billionaires or are publicly traded, come in and buy out homes and just break up the community feeling. So this is something that every city is experiencing. Now, how did the community in that area respond to the decision to keep the mosque closed and to replace it with commercial high rise? And in what ways do you believe this decision contributes to gentrification, Islamophobia, just the signs that we saw from the protests coming out address some of these things? But you were there on the ground, and we'd love to hear some stories from the ground?
So as difficult as it was to have to even be in this position in the first place, the beautiful thing was the response that we saw. So
Mm.
we started responding publicly through public protests on January 13th of this year, 2023. And what we decided to do was we couldn't step foot onto the actual masjid where we had been worshiping for all these years. So we decided to simply have Salatul Jummah right outside of the International Studies Center where the masjid is located. We had a khutbah, and we did the salah there, of course. And that was on Fridays. We also had protests on Saturdays for those who couldn't make it to downtown Raleigh on a Friday. And that was the first step, getting out there, making sure people saw us, making sure the students walking by understood the importance of the building that they were, studying in. And we got a lot of really good attention from the media. We were able to build a lot of good relationships with even non-Muslims who saw what we were doing, but who were also against the rezoning and the potential negative consequences of the rezoning. And so that was the nice thing that came from it, And so the idea is that we were able to take that protest and then convert it also into lobbying to the local government, the City Council of Raleigh. And it was a hard thing to do. It's hard to reach out to elected officials and to not receive a response back sometimes, but know that they were communicating with Shaw University. But I can say with confidence that at least we did get responses from most of the members of the Raleigh City Council.
Lovely. So, from what I've read, the public pressure campaign led to the postponement of the city council's decision on rezoning. Is this true? And how do you plan to continue to advocate for justice in this situation?
So the very first time that the vote went up to allow Shaw University to rezone its properties for mixed use, up until then, their property was zoned for institutional. In short, they can only have educational facilities on their property, but they
Mhm.
wanted mixed use. They wanted commercial, residential, and also their own academic uses and so forth to maximize their potential profit. The very first meeting in which there was a vote on their application for rezoning was in April of this year. And going into the meeting, they were very confident, the administration, that their voting would go their way, that they'd be approved and it would be on to the next step. But there was such a big show from the Muslim community. Despite it being during the month of Ramadan, people still came out and spent hours at the Raleigh Municipal Building during that meeting because our issue was not the only one on the docket for that day.
Mm.
Quite a few other issues were there, but we came out and we showed up in numbers. And that was a really big indicator to our elected officials that we have to take the concerns of the Muslim community seriously. That being said, they postponed the vote. They brought the issue back to the floor in May of this year. It got postponed again because there was not sufficient efforts on the part of the university to engage with us. And then finally, in June of this year, the vote was put, and it was actually passed, their applications for rezoning. But there are a lot of conditions that were placed. So throughout the entire redevelopment process, there have to be a series of meetings with the community can find about what they're doing. And they had to compromise with us, which led to the agreement that actually got us temporarily back into the masjid.
We're going to take another short break and we'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back. We're here with Nigel Edwards on the Justice for All Now show, and we're discussing the future of King Khalid Mosque. Nigel, I wanted to also ask you about the history of Shaw University when it comes to Black history. Ella Baker went to school there. So can you share some of that aspect of that Shaw University's history with our audience?
Yes, so it's a huge part of Black history, being one of the oldest historically Black colleges in the country, and some say the oldest in the South. And this is right after emancipation. So hit the ground running, freely liberated, slaves are now able to get education at such a high level that was previously something they did not have access to. And then if you fast forward to another major milestone in the progress of African Americans with the Civil Rights Movement, you had the SNCC movement, the Students for Nonviolent Coordination Committee, meeting there, giants of the Civil Rights Movement meeting at Shaw University to strategize ways of making things better for people of color everywhere. And so, for that reason, you have an institution, Shaw University, that's been at the forefront of the civil rights movement, which makes it all that more disappointing how we have been treated as a religious minority.
So on point that the history of the university specifically, and then to be treated this way. And so, are there legal, from a legal point of view, the land is owned by Shaw, but the building is owned by the nonprofit? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, and here's where it gets tricky. So, in the literal sense, the land and the building is owned by Shaw University. We've never said otherwise. But the
Okay.
issue is when the money was given to construct this building, what were the conditions of that money? Was it a gift, a bunch of cash they received, no strings attached? We don't think so. We maintain that this was a grant, as it's stated on a plaque that is on the first level of the International Studies Center when you walk in. And this is a grant. It is a gift, but with conditions. And one of those conditions was the establishment of a masjid for the community at large. And as a receiver of this grant, this is a trust. Shaw University is a trustee, and they have to abide by the conditions of that money that was given to them. And by locking us out, they're violating their obligations.
Mhm. Very, those are the specifics that often we don't read about. Are there specific steps that viewers and community members can take to support the efforts to save this legacy at Shaw University, protect the masjid, and address broader issues of gentrification and environmental impact?
Absolutely. So, one thing is just to be informed, right? There are so many people who will ask me questions about what's going on, and I don't mind answering them by any means, but there's also resources out there, news articles you can point to just to stay in things. We do our very best to make sure that the community is informed about what is going on. We have a website, masjidkingkhalid.org, and there you can do things such as you can donate to our cause, you can become a member, take part in the leadership, and just keep track of what's going on. You can read up about the agreement that we have with the university, which is only valid for 3 years. And the idea is that if we don't keep working, if we don't keep pushing forward, that 3 years will go, and then we're out. We're going to be in the same situation that we were in just a few months ago. So we definitely still need the community support when it comes to preserving this message that we've been given the chance to be in finally after so many years of work.
Well, definitely. You heard it, folks. Visit KingKhalidMosque.com. Masjid King Khalid.
MasjidKingKhalid.org.
MasjidKingKhalid.org. In your opinion, how can local authorities strike a balance between development and preserving the culture and historical significance of places like Shaw University and the King Khalid Masjid?
Yeah, I would say the number one thing that they can do, and this won't solve all of our problems, but it's definitely a quintessential step towards any redevelopment. And that is you have to actually listen to the community.
Mhm.
And that is something that was simply not done up until a certain point when the university needed the approval of the city council and we showed up. We forced them to listen to us at that point. But up until then, any questions, no comment. Any people wondering what was going on, very evasive responses, no explanations were given. They just didn't care. So we need to make sure that people are involved. And on that end, government needs to hear the people who are concerned about the changes in their community.
We're going to take a final quick break and we'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back. We've been speaking to Nigel Edwards of Masjid King Khalid in Raleigh, North Carolina, where they've been struggling to keep the masjid open despite efforts to sell the land that it stands on in near Shaw University. So, as we end the show, Nigel, I'd like to hear more from you. Final words, any thing that we might have missed that you'd like to share with our audience.
And the most important thing is that we need to make it a point to care about certain issues collectively as an ummah. We are a very diverse ummah, so we're all not going to have the same level of care or interest in the same things. I fully support, for example, the Palestinian cause, but I'm not going to be disingenuous and say I care just as much about someone who's actually living in Palestine or someone who's even from Palestine. But the point is, I should care. So a masjid is a place for all of us, everyone in the ummah. And so we should have an approach of, if there's one masjid that's in threat of being erased from our earth, that should be a problem for every single Muslim. So we all can't do an equal amount of work when it comes to every single cause. But step one is to care, connect it with your deen and care first and foremost. And if there's something that you can do, even something as simple as signing a petition or sharing a post, do something, do that.
That's such a powerful point. As many of you know, we fight for the rights of people to freely worship around the world, whether it's in India or Burma or China. And when mosques are destroyed or demolished anywhere in the world, we see an uprising. We see people get very, very upset because a masjid, when a masjid is demolished, it's like it's been shaheed. That's the terminology that's used. That and so um, we would also like to see the same sort of fervor in our community when imagine if this was our masjid, the masjid that many of us pray at, spend our Ramadan in. And if that was in danger, how would you react? And that is this feeling that we should have for the rest of the masjid in the Ummah, especially when it's in our own backyards, especially when it is in such a historic place. And so that is something, this is why we did this show, and we hope that many of you can keep in touch with masjidkinkhalid.org and get in touch with Nigel Edwards and the rest of the team there and give your time and efforts to this cause as well. Thank you so much, and do tune in for another episode of Justice for All next week as we have another riveting conversation. At this time, I'd like to thank my producer, Asim Amin, and my intern, Mariam Tisdale. Thank you so much for watching. Assalamu alaikum.